So we are here, or I'm here with Ben of Star Wars Timeline, or maybe you're on Ben's channel itself and you're seeing me on there as a guest, almost as a ghost then. It's a Force ghost. But we are going to have a big old conversation about Kenobi. You know, you've got the Kenobi series coming out, so we're going to talk about our wants, our thoughts, how it's going to connect to other content and other things that you can consume to kind of lead up to it, in a sense, and what the character means to us. I will pre-warn everyone that you may be able to hear a little bit. I have a cold of some sort, it seems, still, and also I was cutting up carpet today, and so that I have allergies and the dust. So I've been sneezing, and poor Ben keeps hearing me blow my nose, so it's pretty gross. I'll make sure I mute it for the audio so none of you listeners have to hear it if you see me do it. But yeah, I'm a little bit croaky. But Ben, how are you doing? Because this is also on your channel, so I feel like you have to... I was obviously joking, but how are you doing, sir? Please introduce yourself to any of my listeners who don't already know who you are.
Right, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. I love to have you on my show. It feels like the introductions are no longer necessary, right? I always have you on my podcast. We talked about prequels, sequels. Guys, for those of you who are watching it on Star Wars Timeline podcast, I'll throw it on there. Mike and I have become good friends over our discussions and love of Star Wars. You come from a generation of prequel fans. I come from the 80s fans who grew up with the original. And it's just so nice and refreshing to share an opinion that is unlike yours, and you really get the opportunity to dig in and try to understand not just this thing that connects us, but how other people are. The world that surrounds Star Wars, I think that's the biggest beauty of it all. And guys, once again, who are watching this podcast, please check out the Genuine Chit-Chat. I'll throw all the links as I usually do, Mike, for you. So you get the opportunity to go and just observe how much of a skilled interviewer Mike is. I'm still learning. I'm the Padawan here, and you're the master.
Well, thank you very much for those compliments. Anyone who's watching my show is going to be like, yeah, we want to know this about Mike. Why is he telling us? I jest. But no, I want to do this collaboration, and obviously, normally when we have shows, you've been on Genuine Chit Chat, and some of my shows I've put on Comics in Motion when we spoke about Book of Boba Fett, and right. I'm going to do a week by week Kenobi show as well, so I'm going to have you on there at some point, as well as other members of the podcasting and YouTube communities as well. But with this one, we both kind of had the same idea around a similar time of discussing Kenobi beforehand. So we're both like, let's not have either of us get the glory of having that on our show. Let's release it to the world. Hence why both our audiences get to hear. I mean, each of our audiences have heard both of us anyway, so this is just saving them from choosing. They now have to choose the feeds, actually. You have to choose your favourites on it. That'll see. But to begin all this, I will just quickly reel off a few small facts about Kenobi. They're just minor things. I always like, anyone who listens to Star Wars comics and canon will know that I love ages of characters. I don't know why. Mm-hmm. I just really like knowing how old characters are. I like it in Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. Anything that's got a lot of lore, I just like knowing ages. And so Kenobi, he was born 57 years before the Battle of Yavin, so that's 57 years before New Hope. So obviously, in A New Hope, when, spoiler, he dies, the worst spoiler in all of Star Wars, obviously, he's 57 years old then, and when we see him in The Phantom Menace, he's 25. In Attack of the Clones, he's 35. And Revenge of the Sith, he is 38. He's from the planet Stew John, and also he is Qui-Gon Jinn's second apprentice after Rael Averross. And so I want to ask you, Ben, who is Kenobi to you? And just take that question as ambiguous as it is, whatever that question means to you. Who is Kenobi to you?
It's interesting that you detail all these like minutia and, the ages of characters, which I think it makes total sense because it sort of helps you understand the timeline and say, okay, this is what the time period where this character lived through. And it also helps you to get like when the character is in their youth or where they are mentally, their maturity and development in terms of age. It's easy to kind of understand the storylines from that perspective and say, well, Obi-Wan Kenobi was much younger in Phantom Menace. He was an apprentice. Don't forget it. We still see his apprentice braid. And later on, he becomes this evolved character. So to answer your question, Mike, what does Kenobi represent to me? I don't get into nitty and gritty of details the way that you do. And I've seen this time and again happening in my comic book store that I managed for 10 plus years here in the local comic book Mama Papa store in the Bronx. And you always had fans come over and talk about dates and character powers and abilities, kind of like a very clear blueprint of what the character is in terms of skills, A, B's, and C's. For me, it's a lot more ambiguous. It's how do I associate with the character in terms of my thrill and excitement of the film, my first initial memories of who Kenobi is. So for me, he was always an old and wise mentor, because I grew up with the originals back in the 80s, and I used to see them back to back, episode 4, 5, and 6, as this one big story. They were indistinguishable to me, and I never sensed progression there. It's just one story. And he's this wise old samurai, and not necessarily the one who steps in to perform action. He's there who sets our young hero on the course. He's the Gandalf of Star Wars. He bestows wisdom, and even later through his spectral form, when he is an apparition and he shows up to Luke, he continues Luke's spiritual growth. That is his role. But there's another aspect of him as well. And this other aspect, still within the frame of the original franchise, is that, to me, he was the only window in what Jedi were like in the Clone Wars. The whole concept, that idea of Clone Wars, did not exist to me, because the Russian translations of the films that I had, it either got lost in translation, or sometimes they had to like really play it by the ear and just make a translation that was, I guess, more sensible. And for some reason, I never knew what these Clone Wars are, or who is Anakin Skywalker. For me, it was always Darth Vader. But when we looked at Kenobi, it's like, oh, so the Jedi must have been like this guy, old and wise, and you listen to their counsel and whatever they have to say, whether it's to the public or whether it's a desperate measure they have to take, like Obi-Wan does in Anchorhead. And then everybody suddenly respects that authority, respects that power and prowess, and says, like, well, better deter to whatever this Jedi is doing. So that's what Kenobi was to be. He described this world that thankfully was not filled with all these details that kind of take away a little bit of fun.
I see what you mean. Yeah. So with me, Kenobi was always the pinnacle of role models for me. Mm-hmm. Whenever I saw him, he was like pure good in the right way, not in a way that's overly self-righteous or anything like that. Just a man who truly, to his core, is purely trying to do the best. And when I saw him in A New Hope first, I remember that, and right. I really connected with him in New Hope. I never really connected with him in The Phantom Menace that much. Obviously, him killing Darth Maul was really cool, but aside from that, I was like, he's okay. He's one of the weaker parts of the movie that aren't the really bad parts. You know, you've kind of got the main bits like Jar Jar and all the politics nonsense, and the pacing and things a little bit, but then right. You've got kind of the secondary parts that are just a little bit weaker than one would hope in The Phantom Menace. And it's just kind of in there. I was like, Obi-Wan's not as good as I want him to be. I really like him in Attack of the Clones. I think he's great. And then Revenge of the Sith, I absolutely adore Ewan McGregor's performance. Ewan McGregor for me is Obi-Wan, even though when I think of Obi-Wan, I think of all Obi-Wans, as in all interpretations, as in we get Clone Wars, as well as Ewan McGregor and Alec Guinness. But I think of Alec Guinness and Ewan McGregor specifically as one. And for me, he's just always been that, kind of similar to you, the guiding light. He's trying to be the best that he can. He makes mistakes along the way, but in the end, he does essentially save the galaxy, especially paying attention to the original trilogy. I
got a question for you, as a prequel fan specifically, because I totally agree with you. I was the fan who enjoyed Part 2, The Phantom Menace, a great deal better than Part 1, which was like so disappointed with, and then Part 3 I loved even more. And even when you take away all the negative parts of it, and you understand sometimes the actor performs just not the right take, it should have been another take, you still get to recognize tremendous talent that Ewan McGregor brings and charisma that he brings. But to you, as far as his character is concerned, you mentioned a word that he's just pure. He's the guiding light. In light of what he says to Anakin at the very end of the film, he said, "I had failed you, Anakin." Mm-hmm. Do you feel that Kenobi himself is incorruptible as character?
This is something I've thought about before, because I know there's people who've done fan art of a dark Kenobi, and I think that I don't think that anyone is infallible, and I think that one thing that shows this is the idea of this, at least, is in the Clone Wars Series 6 arc with Yoda, when he travels to the Force, the really Force planets, and he has that vision, and he fights a version of himself. I think that's trying to show that Yoda is perceived as the most incorruptible Jedi, and even he has a dark side. So I don't think that it's impossible. I just think that the Kenobi that we are introduced to at that point was not impossible to turn, but he was kind of beyond the point. You know, I think we're like Anakin, for example. He could have been turned, but if he had a different path to where he was, the time that you'd have to turn him would have to be earlier. And I think with Kenobi, if you got him around the Phantom Menace, if you got him just after killing Darth Maul, and maybe if Darth Maul got away, and then someone like Palpatine somehow got their mitts on him and twisted him into trying to track down and kill Darth Maul, and then he did it in cold blood or something like that, that could be enough to twist Kenobi in some way, I think. But
it makes total sense, yeah.
I don't think that when we see him from
so he's simply outgrown that volatile age.
He's very set in his ways in Attack of the Clones and in Revenge of the Sith, and we see this throughout the Clone Wars as well and other content. He is very strict to the Order. There's even there's a New Dawn book which is by John Jackson Miller, and obviously he wrote the Legends book Kenobi. Well, in that, Kenobi is in the prologue and he speaks to Kanan a little bit, and he's also Kenobi's in Dark Disciple a fair amount, the book about Quinlan Vos and Asajj Ventress, which is pretty good. It was Ace, it's a really good thing, by Christy Golden. That Kenobi plays quite a big role in that book, and he is, to the book, he is in a lot of ways the antithesis of Quinlan Vos, who's very much a maverick, much like, to almost his chagrin, is that Kenobi is is very different to Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon's a maverick, doesn't play by the rules, kind of does his own thing. Kenobi's very set in his ways. And so I feel like even though some of his issues with his character come up, as in some of his flaws, are being so dogmatic and so faithful in the Order and not thinking from himself in the right ways at points, he is still very good. He's devoted. If the Order crumbled, he would still be good. And I think that's what Kenobi is really going to show. It's in the show.
And he does outlive the Order, right, as we see in the original trilogy. And the way that he has these musings and thoughts of what came before. And he's like, I made through it. I was strong enough.
Yeah, it's interesting that he is the first introduction to anyone what a Jedi actually is, as you say, because in A New Hope you only get to see him. He's the only example. And then in Empire you're introduced to Yoda, and then in Return of the Jedi you're introduced to Luke as a Jedi, because he's not really a full Jedi. I mean, he's not technically a full Jedi till he beats Vader, but he's quite Jedi-like in Return of the Jedi in a lot of ways. But yeah, he's the quintessential Jedi. He's what most people think of when they think of Jedi. They think of Yoda and Obi-Wan. That's it. So I love Kenobi as a character as well, because I think he has the tragedy. He's got the true tragedy in Star Wars. If you see him, and this is going to be some spoilers for the Clone Wars, but he falls in love in the Clone Wars, and the person he falls in love with dies, and he has to deal with that. Then he loses his master in the Phantom Menace. Before all that, he loses Anakin to the dark side, and he will always feel like it's his fault. And then he has to spend like 20-ish or 19 years in exile to try and train someone. And as the spoiler alert for the trailer, but we're going to discuss the trailer later anyway, so make sure you watch the trailer anyway. The trailer for Obi-Wan Kenobi shows that Owen is telling Kenobi to leave, just like in the Journals of Old-Ben Kenobi comics. It's the same sort of thing. So he's just got this tragic story about him, and finding out about him in A New Hope initially is sort of, he's old hermit, but you don't necessarily think about those things. Or did you? Like, when you saw the original trilogy, did you think much about what Kenobi was doing in those years living up to where Luke was?
Yeah, I was. And once again, the beauty and the thrill of it was the story that takes place off screen, and you don't get to see the way that he describes it, because it builds all these mental images. It's almost like reading a good book. It gives you just enough detail to say, okay, I understand what is happening. I understand the general setup, but what's out there? What's more? We even had in Russia at one point, at least on my street, rumors that, hey, how come there's only episode 4, 5, and 6? Did those American kids get like 1, 2, and 3, and we just don't have those tapes here? At one point, there was a rumor there's 22 movies out there.
Wow.
And your mind goes you run with it. You're like, oh my God, where's Obi-Wan before? Where's Anakin? Why did he leave, Tatooine? What happens? And this is why I think there was, to kind of get a little bit off course, the specific topic that we're talking about. But this is where I feel that a lot of fans get their sense of ownership. Like, hey, this is my fantasy. This is my Star Wars. And when you start tinkering and changing things around, which Kenobi is not quite what I imagined him to be as a kid, the way he shows in prequels. It's a pretty logical extension of it. It makes sense. It's in tune with what George Lucas establishes before, but it's not quite what I imagined. But I was absolutely concerned with what's the placement of all of these players in this huge, huge drama that we only see the ending of. We only see the last chapter, because arguably when the movie opens up, they already stole the death plans. Tantive 4 is like zooming out there to their planet of destination where they can execute the final plan and defeat the Empire, right? And you just get into the good parts. Like, hey, hold on a second. Like, I was confused. Why is Kenobi a hermit? Why are they calling him crazy? And why a character who's not introduced until the very moment that Luke encounters him, that he has this very close familiarity with Luke's past? Hold on a second. I don't get it. You knew he's like, you are just as confused as Luke is in that film. And that's the beauty of it.
And did you find with any of the Legends material that came out that was about Kenobi? You know, there's the Legends book Kenobi that I haven't read, and I have not consumed anywhere near the amount of Legends material you have. I'm only scratching the surface very recently.
Right.
Aside from video games, I played a lot of video games. But aside from that, I've not consumed that much canon, that much Legends content. You know, I'm a canon content fiend, whereas you and I are slightly reversed in that way, but you've consumed a lot more canon than I have of Legends. But with the book Kenobi, did that... I know that that's quite held in high regard, but you yourself aren't as much of a fan of it as some other people. So I thought you could tell us about that book, and maybe if there's other Legends examples of a better written Kenobi or things that you wanted more. I'd just love to hear about the sort of the Legends perspective of the gap filling of Kenobi. Yeah.
So as far as John Jackson Miller goes, I want to say it straight out of the bat. He is more than capable author. I mean, we know of his talent. He wrote one of the best Star Wars comic books, Knights of the Old Republic. He was involved with stories that are stellar. And I don't attribute Kenobi's... That's the book from 2013 we're talking about, guys. For those who are not familiar, a Legends novel. I attribute most of the novel's problems not in the quality of writing, because it's a very, very competent book. He knows what to do with his characters. He knows how to build tension. He knows where to lead you in the story. My biggest gripe is with why that story? Because I felt that it was either held... I mean, and we don't know. We can only suppose or guess what happened behind the screen, what were the Lucasfilm story group telling him that he shouldn't touch. Maybe George Lucas had further plans for Kenobi. Maybe he was going up with his own version of Kenobi book. Or who knows, maybe the Clone Wars show continued on past the point of the Clone Wars, and later on Lucas gets to develop these characters as they approach the original trilogy. We don't know that. But anyway, I felt that Kenobi gets lost in translation in that book. He's nowhere to be found. Because when you're dealing with a very specific time frame of post Order 66. That's exactly when the book takes place. You cannot ignore some momentous events and things that happened to him. You cannot ignore Order 66 and his PTSD. You cannot ignore how he felt about losing Anakin. I felt that should have the book been darker? Not necessarily, but you need to include all of these details that comprise who Kenobi is. And it felt to me that he is unwilling participant in this little micro drama that is not related to the larger world of Star Wars or the future events of building the Resistance, working hand in hand with Bail Organa, reaching out to Alderaan and saying, like, yes, the hope survives. I'm here looking after young Luke. None of it is there. Instead, he has concerned himself with locals and a type of storyline that I felt takes us away from who Kenobi is. And I did not understand why in the world he is reaching out to Qui-Gon Jinn is never answered. It boggles my mind. I don't understand it. Because there's interludes between the chapters where Obi-Wan Kenobi, he's like in his adobe and he's lonely. And obviously, the author begins to touch the mind of Kenobi that we should be able to recognize. And he kind of like reaches out there in the darkness, is like, Qui-Gon, what could I have done differently? Or what do you think they said, my master, I need some guidance. And it's never reciprocated. And it's such an opportunity lost that the book didn't work for me. By the time it ended, I felt that if you rename Kenobi into Joe the Jedi, it would have worked just as fine.
I see what you're saying.
And you don't do that in a character-specific book.
That's a very good point. Yeah, it was basically just it wasn't about Kenobi as you'd expect. It was just there was a story going on in the Star Wars universe, and Kenobi happened to be involved in it. But if you changed it to anyone, it wouldn't have made any difference in the greater story. So
right, and some
Kenobi?
and some readers loved it and cherish it for the fact that they're saying, well, we do like that distraction. We do like to see that other facet of the character.
I see. So I haven't read that book personally. I've heard mixed things about it. I think generally it's held in well regard. I've heard that, as you say, it's a well written book and things. It's just interpretation of what people would like. Right. Me personally, I want to see the PTSD. I want to know about his suffering and how much like the trailer itself has got so many elements on it, which I'll tackle in a moment. But before we do, so what other? I know you're a fan of the Dark Horse Clone Wars comics, and they've got things like Quinlan Vos in it and Aayla Secura and some of the Jedi that we know about, the big Star Wars fans, but you don't get on screen very much and things. Is he in those very much? Does he have anything in the comics elsewhere in Legends, or is Kenobi not actually explored as much in Legends as one would hope?
I'd have to really dig deep into my memory because I had read The Republic in years back, but I'm pretty sure he's there. Quinlan Vos is prominent in Yandu Shema's run of the comic books. And from what I recall, and guys, do forgive me that I can't specifically drop the names of particular comic books that I specifically remember scenes from that Kenobi was like stood out for me. Mainly it was novels like Labyrinth of Evil and Path of Deception. There's a couple of books. I'm sorry, they're completely. I'm losing the track of the names of them. But there's a lot of Clone era Legends novels where the relationship of Anakin and Kenobi is being explored, and it basically channels the prequel era Kenobi, and it is very consistent because once you stop evaluating the filmmaking quality of the prequels and you just enjoy the characters for what they are and the kind of the story that George Lucas was putting together and other authors were able to perfect for him through comic books, through video games, like you mentioned. When you look at Kenobi from that perspective, that's exactly what that book does. And even if we jump from Legends into the canon, if we talk about books like, Master and Apprentice with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan Kenobi, again, it continues that relationship of who Kenobi was as a student and who he is now as a master, and why is he a true believer, and what kind of values he wants to instill into Anakin. Again, guys, I can't call out specifics, but I'm pretty sure in the Republic and the Dark Times novels, graphic novels, there's plenty of examples where Kenobi shines.
That's cool. Yeah, it's good to know because I do want to get into more of the Legends comics and things. I've got I want to collect more of the essentials, the Legends sort of omnibus, the Epic Legends collections, I think they're called. I've got one of those that has got the 2 sets of comic adaptations of the Force Unleashed comics because that's my favorite Legends story. But yeah,
this will be one of them.
Yeah, I mean, you've
just
got
my recent acquisition.
Oh, so beautiful.
Fantastic. But yeah, so this one deals with a lot of the Purge, the Dark Empire, when post the Republic. I hope they do release the Republic ones as well.
Yeah, I've been on the lookout for certain ones. I want to get Tales of the Jedi as well, but that was out a little while ago, and they haven't got the omnibus yet. They've got trade paperbacks still, so I'm hoping that'll come out soon. But anyway, so obviously when we were speaking about Kenobi and things, the next thing kind of comes up is obviously there's the TV show. That's the big reason we're speaking about Kenobi, because we've had bits of Kenobi throughout the years, mainly in Clone Wars. We've had quite a lot of Kenobi-centric story arcs in that. We had the one episode in Series 3 of Rebels where Kenobi pops up, and it's brilliant. So, aside from that and the books we've mentioned, Master and Apprentice, Dark Disciple, there's the 2 books that are out this year. One that only came out a couple of days ago, which is Brotherhood by Mike Chen, and then there's Padawan, which I should have looked up who wrote that, and I apologise, I've forgotten. But we're getting those which are going to be supporting the show, just like there's now an Obi-Wan Kenobi mini-series of comics, which is, I think 5 issues, it might be 6, but I think it's 5. And issue 1 came out, and issue 1 is about him as a Padawan, or as a young...
Yeah, I read that one.
Yeah, great, I've got it as well, and I read it. So I think then the next one's going to be him under Qui-Gon, so it's going to be pieces of his life. So the show, from what we know about it in general, what is it that you when you first heard of a Kenobi series, when it got announced ages ago, there's the movie in talks and people were thinking about, and then it kind of disappeared for a while, and then the series came to the forefront. When it got fully announced and confirmed, what was the first thing you kind of thought of, either what you wanted from a Kenobi series or just the first reaction to a series being made about Obi-Wan Kenobi?
I will tell you exactly in a second when this crazy noise passes.
Oh, for the outside world.
They're not letting us enjoy our conversation, Mike. It needs to happen every time. Oh, here we go. We're gone. So yeah, what are the expectations? I mentioned this before on a live stream with my boys that I try to play pretend that my expectations are very moderate, and then I'm patiently awaiting for the show, and I'll judge it as it comes in. But I can't hide it. Of course I'm hyped. Of course I'm super thrilled. But as far as check marks go, as far as what particular notes the show needs to hit, I almost never do that. I don't have those prerequisites. Like, otherwise, why wait for something? If it fulfills the criteria, then it's good. If it doesn't fill the criteria, then it's bad. Like, I can't operate. My mind doesn't work that way. It's do whatever the hell you want, and after the fact that it's done, throw it on the screen. That's the thrill of it, the risk-taking of a story. And once it's there on the big screen, and we get to be the judges of it, and then I'm 100% sure, like everything else, it's going to work for some, and it's not going to work for someone else. It's fine. That's the way all content should be. It can't cater to either one side of the fandom. I think the integrity comes from the directors and script writers and the story group and Kathy Kennedy sitting down and saying, what do we think works for this character? What is the natural, logical evolution with this character is? Our interpretation on it, our take on it, just like people have been interpreting Shakespeare for hundreds of years. That's the beauty of it. When you hear a new playwright taking his own stab at Shakespeare and giving his own flavor and interpretation of it. And sometimes that interpretation will endure for decades, and that's what people will follow because it has a certain appeal. It reveals something about Shakespeare, or in this case, Kenobi, that we've never considered before. That's the hidden surprise that I like. So as far as story goes, almost zero expectations. The only thing I want them to do right is that particular duel, which I'm sure we'll elaborate upon, do it right. Do it in a way that is consistent and honors with the material that came before that and doesn't interfere with it. Because when you start washing it out with too much repetitive themes, like it's not appealing anymore. But one thing that I absolutely demand of the show, and I'm not saying the Star Wars showrunners owe something to me, that they're obligated to fulfill me because I've invested so much time and money into this stuff. Nobody owes me anything. But I think the show, if it wants to continue to be in sync with its fandom, it absolutely must feel special. It absolutely must put forward the best talent that Disney Plus and Lucasfilm has been able to pile up together up to this point. It needs to represent the best of Star Wars, especially as far as Disney Plus is concerned, because this is, to me, the future of Star Wars on television, on Disney Plus, on serialized stories. And they need to get the pacing right. They need to get the story elements right, because up to this point, neither Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett have been particularly strong in those areas.
Yeah, I see that perspective. I think with Book of Boba Fett, and we're going to spoil a Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian, we expect that you've probably seen all these things by now.
Yeah.
But with Book of Boba Fett, I found it was all right. I enjoyed it, but it could have been better, but it was okay. And then the best episodes were the 2 Mandalorian episodes, which, I was just like, why are they kind of there? And now I'm kind of, Grogu, now the kind of...
Did you like the Tusken episode? Episode 2, I believe?
Yeah, I liked that. My favourite were the Mandalorian ones. I know they weren't the most... maybe cultured in some ways, but I just loved them. The first Mandalorian episode, I think, some of the best Star Wars in the new canon since the movies. Just that episode when he comes in with a Darksaber and just like slicing people up. It's so cool. I love. There is a big coolness factor to Star Wars that I appreciate, and Mandalorian has a lot of that, and that's a lot of people mistake that for true substance in certain ways. However, I do think Mandalorian does have substance. I just think Series 2 is much better than Series 1. Series 1, I was like, it's good. And then series 2, I was like, this is really good. This is amazing. And then Book of Boba Fett, I was like, yeah, this is good again. Like, it's not getting better. It's like, whoop.
So we can agree that it fluctuates a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I still think the best Star Wars content outside the movies is Rebels. I think that's just top tier. Clone Wars is close behind, and I think anyone who thinks Clone Wars or Rebels is better is down to personal preference, but most Star Wars fans who've seen both are like, yeah, Clone Wars and Rebels are two of the best pieces of Star Wars content. I know obviously you love Bad Batch as well, which is great, but it's one of those things where when this series came out or when it was announced rather, I was glad they didn't do a movie, because I was like, I don't want 2 hours of Kenobi, because they'll probably make it some giant big puzzle he has to solve, like another super weapon or something annoying like that, or it would just be about this one big battle. It will just all be about the Vader fight or whatever.
Right.
And I don't want that. I want to know Kenobi as a character more. Like, one thing I saw online, which is quite upsetting, is this is probably the last time we're ever going to see Ewan McGregor as Kenobi. And obviously a few years ago we had no idea we'd ever see Ewan McGregor as Kenobi again, so this is amazing. But this has got to, like, as much as 6 episodes from what I recall, and 2 episodes getting dropped on the Friday, and so I'm very excited about it. But I'm also wary. It's like, we've basically got 5 episodes. It's going to be 6, but I'm going to watch the 2 next to each other. So I'm like, okay, I want this amount of Kenobi. I want to go into his character more. I want to know what he was feeling. I felt what he was feeling in Revenge of the Sith when he was yelling, "You're my brother, Anakin," and that sort of back and forth. In A New Hope and things, you get the gist. And if you read the certain point of view books, you get a bit more and things, but you kind of understand in a bit. Once he sees that Luke is ready, that's his adventure starting, as you said earlier on in this conversation. That's Kenobi's been waiting for 19 years doing seemingly nothing. Right. That point is when he gets his mission to really start. So what was he doing? What was his mental state like? How has he wrestled with his failure? And in the trailer, when it was the first trailer that dropped, and I've watched the 2 trailers, I'm not going to watch any more. I couldn't resist watching the second trailer, though. Normally I'd just watch the one, and I'd be like, I don't want to watch any more, I don't want to spoil it, but I can't resist. I'm more excited for Kenobi than any other piece of Star Wars content since The Force Awakens. But with it, in the trailer, when Kenobi says the part about the war, and he was like, he fought in the war and we lost. I was like, even that moment, I was like, oh, emotion in the trailer already. It's just like, oh, and the way he just says we lost, it's like you don't hear that. I think it hits me so hard because I don't think you ever really hear films, or it's quite rare to hear a film, either trailer or film mention, just be like, we fought in a war and we lost, and not be, an army veteran talking about decades past. I'm talking about someone literally who's experiencing the fallout of the war they've lost. And also, it's not history. It's not people writing the history books and going, yeah, they lost because they're bad, or they lost because there was something wrong. This is, in the Star Wars universe, the Jedi lost, because they were misguided, but they were still trying to be good. And now the Empire, who is, in air quotes, evil, is now, completely destroying and turning over the world. And he's got this one mission, and it's like, he feels responsible for this. He's got all this weight, and he's the survivor. He has to take the load of all the people who he has seen die, and also who he knows is dead, and the people he feels like he's failed. And it's like, that is so much weight for one person.
I wanted to elaborate on what you're saying of that particular perception of who Kenobi is at that moment in time. There's another part in the trailer where he has a discussion with Lars. Yeah. Right. And he says, well, when obviously talking about Luke, when he comes of age, he needs to be trained. And Lars, the younger actor, channeling the original British actor that was in A New Hope, is like you trained his father. And you know what? To me, it has been going on since The Phantom Menace launched. I always superimpose events that should be taken at the same time from George Lucas's clone period and George Lucas's original saga period, and now the new canon. All 3 exist in my mind as these 3 parallel universes, and I tie all the pieces together myself. That's how I interact with Star Wars. I have my Star Wars, which is the 3 movies, then I have the clone era, and then I have the new canon. There's a very specific and interesting part of Star Wars theme, that the Jedi Purge, the Dark Times, of where these noble knights from before we saw the prequel trilogy, we could only assume what they were like, but we knew that they were being exterminated, and this villain, this masked, armored killer was after them, right? So there's one book that I read in the 90s called The Children of the Jedi by Barbara Hambly. This one takes place a couple of years after the episode 6. And I was so invested in that particular time period because I wanted to know, hey, what is happening to these Jedi families, to their kids, as the Emperor and Vader march on and they destroy all these families, right? And in this book, even though it's after Kenobi is gone, it's a little bit after episode 6, it still deals with the aftermath of Order 66 and all of these ruined families. It was such a fascinating chapter where Luke is not just after that Jedi knowledge, Jedi powers, Jedi knowledge, I got to reestablish the order. It's things that are constantly circling in his mind, but also the culture, the lives, the families that were behind it. And every step of the way that he is in his quest, all he sees is these phantoms from the past of what these Jedi were like. So when we're talking about the Kenobi show, the whole reason I'm bringing this book up is it will be so interesting to interlink that Kenobi, because in my mind, it's always young Anakin, who is a young man, and Obi-Wan Kenobi meets him on Tatooine, and he's no slave, and he's like, hey, kid, why don't you go with me and we'll fight in the war? And his brother, Lars, says, no, you can't do that. You have obligations here. Stay here, keep your head low, and let other people deal with this whole, galactic civil war. And that just one episode in the trailer is able to converge all of Star Wars in one piece. And I'm like, I can't wait for this. I can't wait to see how this resolves. The past meeting the current Star Wars.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because the way I think about Star Wars in my mind when I'm trying to visualize timelines and etc., I think of it if people thought of like just rectangles, like kind of just like 3 rectangles kind of apart, gaps, and it's trilogy, and then there's string that connects them, and on that string you've got kind of between the prequels and the original, you've got Clone Wars, not Clone Wars, you've got Bad Batch, and then you've got the few bits of sort of canon content between those things, and then you've got the original trilogy, and then you've got the sequel trilogy and the few bits of content that connect them, but it's just thin strings, and then you've got sort of post-era periods. You've got things like The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, which take place after Return of the Jedi, but they don't really connect with Return of the Jedi or with Force Awakens. There's, rumours about there's the cloning stuff that's going to thinly potentially link to Snoke, and obviously there's references to the Empire and the Stormtroopers, but it doesn't actually... You could watch Mandalorian with never seeing the original trilogy, and obviously the other way around works as well. But there isn't that content which is like a big, weighty thing that directly connects to main characters. It's like we're getting another block in here. It's kind of Solo, we got it a little bit, but the problem is with Solo, because Han Solo obviously doesn't appear in the prequels because he was so young then, you can't go any further. So for me, when you think of the Solo thing, you look at that and it's almost like a filter goes down, and you've got the 3 trilogies, which is this one's blacked out, this one's all full, and then this one he's just, in the start one and a smidge in the end. You then get a little nub coming out the middle, or the original trilogy coming out, and you're like, oh, here's a bonus, here's like a prequel, here's an add-on. But with Kenobi, it's literally connective tissue. It's literally, if they do it in the right way, as we all hope, they're going to directly connect, and it's like in the middle of basically the battle we saw on Mustafar in Order 66, and the at-peace Kenobi, who's literally willing to die at the hands of Vader to allow Luke to escape. We're meeting the dead middle of that. And they have to balance it so well. And what I'm hoping is that we're going to see the Kenobi at the start, who's basically, he's doing it for Luke, but he is barely hanging on with the guilt and everything just overwhelming him. And we get to see that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we get to see that. But from what the trailer seems to show, and from some of the... I try not to look at behind-the-scenes images or set images, but I obviously watch the trailers, where you see it obviously travels to another world. And my theory is probably, from what I think the trailer's making us think, is... Inquisitors come, like maybe Kenobi saves someone inadvertently, causes a scene, the Empire come and investigate, and then he has to try and lead the Empire away from Tatooine to make them completely not even realise that Luke is there, and in doing so he has to kind of make a bit of a scene, and then they are like, oh my god, it's Kenobi, let's go get him, and then he kind of takes them on a wild goose chase and has to, I don't know, fake his death or what. Obviously he fights Vader, so I don't know how that interaction is going to go, but he has to do it in a way where they stop looking for him and don't decide to go back to Tatooine where they kind of first found him. So it's this thing of, I feel like Marvel and Star Wars are quite good with misdirection, quite a lot with their trailers.
Yeah.
So I'm like, is that going to be it? Or are they doing the thing which other series often do, which you look at the trailer and you go, wow, that's so much that happens. And then you watch the first episode and all of the trailer is in the first like 20 minutes. And from that, it's like the next 5-6 episodes, you've literally seen maybe 1 second of footage, which is like a panning shot. That's it. You know nothing else.
I hope it's the case here as well.
Yeah. The trailers, they really excited me. When the first trailer came out, I was like, yeah, I'm going to watch it anyway. You know, I'm sure it'll be really good. And then I watched the trailer and I was like, oh God, John Williams score. And I was like, oh, John Williams is writing original music. What did you say? Oh, we've got Ewan McGregor back. What did you? I didn't realise we were going to get this stuff. And it's like all these things come up, all this emotion. I'm like, I haven't felt like
I almost cried, man. I surprised myself. I almost cried. I teared up when the Duel of the Fates theme plays. I couldn't believe it. How evocative it is. Like, oh my God. And again, to me, it was a permutation of my past and my present colliding with one another. It's the Kenobi and Lars and Anakin story that exists in my mind. And then the one that we see in the clones, the two are becoming one. And it's okay because look, it's all fiction, it's all fantasy, and you can always bring something close to your heart and say, yeah, that's real story to me. And something that you dislike, it's just like, I'll pretend that it never existed because I don't like it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But yeah, it's also with Kenobi, I think, you linked into it there, it's kind of, there's nostalgia, but they've tapped into it for basically anyone who isn't of the newest generation. If you're a generation of Star Wars fans whose first introduction to Star Wars was the sequel trilogy, you won't feel the same connection to Kenobi in the way that you'll be as excited for this series necessarily. Obviously, there are people who got into Star Wars due to the sequels and then probably thought, oh, I prefer the prequels or originals, and Kenobi is really cool, I really like that. But I think that when you grew up without 7, 8, and 9 or Solo or Rogue One, and you grew up obviously with yourself with just the original trilogy and me with the original trilogy, and then, you know, I was 5 when Phantom Menace came out, so then, 7 or 8 when Attack of the Clones, and then so 11 I think when Revenge of the Sith came out. So my formative years of that age when I really started forming memories, it's kind of like in my mind I was like, oh yeah, Phantom Menace came out, and then Attack of the Clones, and then Revenge of the Sith. Because obviously when a kid, I watched it, I was like, that's really cool. I like Star Warsy things, playing video games and that sort of jazz, but had no real concept of time. Whereas now it's like, okay, well, you've got the next 10 years of Disney. Here's wait, and it feels like we're waiting much longer for things, even though we're getting things really quickly. You feel like you're waiting because back then we didn't know we were going to get any more. You know, and it's such a different feeling. And so we're getting something that we didn't realize we necessarily needed or wanted, and it connects to both of the now 2 previous generations of Star Wars fans in very different ways, I think. But
it'll be very interesting to see how it's received by both fandoms, both sides of the fandom.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be very interesting. So, is there anything else in the trailer that you wanted to mention before we delve into further subjects? Because obviously the trailer, there's the Inquisitors, which I'm quite intrigued by, which anyone listening who is unfamiliar, you should be by now, they feature primarily in Rebels, in the canon at least, and in Legends there's only Inquisitors. Is it in the radio drama? Is that when?
Yes, in 1980 original Star Wars radio drama, which I just recently learned, because like everyone else, I thought it was a Dave Filoni's addition to the Star Wars universe. It was not. So my understanding is West End Games, that developed a lot of Star Wars RPG books in the 80s, they supplied a lot of lore that a lot of early Bantam era Star Wars authors used, like certain ship names or shipyards or particular characters, or who was the first person who was behind stealing, the plans to the Death Star and so forth. So, and the Inquisitorium that ordered that faction comes out of that radio drama, which I guess we can directly credit to George Lucas. And funny enough, that's exactly what I pictured as a kid when I saw Darth Vader parading in Tantive 4, and he was so dramatically different from stormtroopers. Like, okay, there's many of these guys here on the ship, but there's one of him. So he's probably upper rank. This is my inner child, like analyzing it. Has got to be more like him, right? He's just a general. He can't be the only one. The other ones, maybe there's females there. Maybe the other ones who have like slightly different helmet, but they're also machine-like. And guess what? We got Inquisitors. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention about the trailer is, let me see. Give me a second to capture my thought. I had really, really interesting question for you, but it'll come to me. I promise.
That's fine. I mean, with the trailer, there's obviously the John Williams score is a big part of it as well. I found the fact that he is writing original music for Kenobi, and it's like music is such a massive part of Star Wars, both nostalgia or anything. I hear Duel of Fates anywhere, and I'm like, I need to hear the rest of this. I don't know where I'm going. Where's that coming from? It's like it's like a dog when there's like food nearby. I'm like, get jittery. It's like, where's that coming from? That's my favorite thing.
It came to me. So I don't know if you saw this piece of promotional art or not. Minor spoiler. We have Kenobi in his hood. We have Vader in his helmet. And in between them, there's kind of like ethereal kind of like aura, whether you don't quite understand whether it's real or not. But it's them going versus one another, holding their lightsabers high, and things are about to pop off. What are your thoughts on this duel in connection to, specifically, even though, your generation is prequels, but you're so well versed in all the details of minutia of the films, what is your response to that particular duel, to episode 4, and how Kenobi talks about Vader, and how Vader says, I have not sensed this presence since, and you get the sense of like, okay, there was kind of encounter, there was kind of tension between the two. And obviously when they meet for the final duel, it's like, when last we met, I was but a learner. What are they referring to in A New Hope? And how can the show and the trailer naturally lead to that point that it doesn't take away from A New Hope?
This is something, I think, the biggest problem I have had with the announcement of Vader being in Kenobi. First of all, it's quite upsetting to me that something that massive is immediately being told to everyone. I have a suspicion that he's going to have a bigger role than people think, but I think it's more so going to be, we're going to see a lot of him interacting with the Inquisitors and him kind of reacting to things going on, as opposed to there being a specific story with him until he starts connecting with Kenobi. He's going to be trying to find Kenobi. Kenobi's going to be trying to get attention away from Luke, assumedly. And I first thought, I was like, right, hopefully they'll just have Vader in the first episode and we won't have to be like, oh, when's he going to pop up? Because otherwise the whole time everyone's going to be being like, when's he going to show? But then them being like, oh yeah, they're going to have another confrontation. Like them just announcing that with the show before even a trailer dropped. And it's like, right, so we know now that they're going to fight. It's like, but I didn't want to know that. Like, I knew there was a confrontation when we watched A New Hope, The interaction from that was, basically Obi-Wan and Vader fought in some way and Vader lost, in essence. Or, when he, left, I was just the learner. It's like, okay, so you may have been exiled or something like that. You see it in Mustafar in, Revenge of the Sith and things, and you go, okay, well, he basically lost the fight. That makes sense. That works. And now it's like, oh, we're going to have another fight that Kenobi's basically going to have to now win, and Vader's going to have to know he won, but Vader's not going to look for him, in theory, any further, because there's no sign anyone's actually looking for Kenobi by A New Hope or anything, and why wouldn't they go back to Tatooine? So it does open up all these questions. I'm just a bit like, I feel like it's one of those annoying little things where either they're going to just ignore it and they're going to do their own story anyway, and it's going to be one of those weird little quirks of Star Wars that we occasionally get, or they're going to try and force it in a way, kind of like, and I'm not saying I'm against this, but in Solo, when, Solo said in New Hope parsec, and because George Lucas thought it was time when it was actually distance. So they then basically did the thing in Solo where they made the Kessel Run, the trick is to do it in the shortest period of time, the shortest distance, as opposed to the quickest time. And that's how they wrote around it. It's like, okay, that's clever, and I get that, and it works now in the canon, but it does feel somewhat heavy-handed in certain ways.
Yeah.
And I'm just conscious, I'm like, are they going to do... I want the Kenobi and Vader fight to be genuine, but now I know it's basically rigged, where it's probably just going to be Obi-Wan's going to win. But how is he going to win without it being as epic as Mustafar? Vader's not going to jump over him and just have his all his arms and legs sliced off again. If they did, that would be... Could you imagine?
Unless, right? If there is this particular... First of all, I don't know how they can reconcile the fact that Vader says in A New Hope, last time we learned I was but a Padawan, but a learner. He stops being a learner after Mustafar. There's no other precedent for them to meet for Vader to remain a Padawan, a learner. So that's done. I don't know how they're going to reconcile that. But then there is another aspect of it. When Vader gives the command, he's like, scour the ship. I want every quarter of the ship searched. And he says, I haven't felt this presence since. So if he presumes that Kenobi's gone and dead, and there's no reason to search for him, what if in this one, Obi-Wan Kenobi loses and makes it seem like he dies? And I also proposed this to the guys that I do live stream with, Josh and Jimmy. I said, what if they kind of put a spin on this whole thing? It's like poetry, it rhymes, which I can't stand that. But anyway, what if they put a flip on it and say Vader gets to Kenobi so hard and so much and just twists his insides where Kenobi says, I hate you, Anakin. I can't stand you. And Vader says, I loved you. You were my master. You were supposed to protect me. And chop, and does something to Kenobi, which makes it seem like that's it. Kenobi is no more. I don't have to worry about him anymore. And that kind of reconciles A New Hope a little bit.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I highly doubt they'll do that. But I do see what you're getting at there. I don't think we'll ever hear Vader say the word love, aside from in Return of the Jedi. Yeah. I think it's just he's too far gone. I think maybe Obi-Wan is going to try and offer his hand and be like, he still probably feels responsible for Anakin turning, and then their confrontation is going to be like Obi-Wan realizing it wasn't purely his fault that Anakin turned. It's not him who's the sole reason, and he's going to probably fight Vader and reconcile with that. I mean, one thing I've also thought about with it, I've thought maybe it's going to be a Force thing where that he's going to, maybe Obi-Wan is going to do some sort of crazy Force thing that Vader's not seen before, like maybe Luke's astral projection in Last Jedi, and he's going to somehow do that and then trap Vader somewhere for ages and disappear, and then Vader's going to be like, you knew more about the Force. I had no idea. You beat me. That could work, I suppose. But another side is like the Force. Like they just both do a big old Force push, and they do that thing where it's like you see a little thing appearing, and both their hands are shuddering, and you hear like, and it might be something a little bit like that. But yeah, I'm not sure how they're gonna do it. I'm excited to find out. And as long as there's more emotional, like one of my favorite things, and this is a spoiler for Rebels, the end of Series 2 of Rebels is some of my favorite Star Wars that exists. I mean, Rebels from the end of Series 1 of Rebels, all the way to the end of Rebels is some of my favorite Star Wars ever. I just think it's incredible. But the finale of Series 2, you get Ezra and Kanan face Vader, and you just get the feel of how powerful he is, and you get the same in Jedi Fallen Order. And then Ahsoka shows up, and you get the interaction between Ahsoka and Vader. And it's just some of the best Star Wars I've ever seen. And
it's heartbreaking.
It's so emotional. And I'm like, if it's even half of that, I will be so happy. I even said to Megan when I watched the trailer of Kenobi, I was like, I may cry at this show at some point. Maybe when it first starts, I don't know. It may just come because it's just Kenobi, to me, he's always been my favorite character. Like my Star Wars tattoo on my arm.
Right.
Initially, I was thinking about having Kenobi's head up there. I changed it, but he's been my favorite character in anything ever, of like any franchise. Like he is the character. I was like, if you had to aspire to be like any character, Kenobi is one of those ones where
it's a great role model.
Yeah, he's very wise, especially his wise, measured version of himself that Alec Guinness plays, and he knows he basically does everything right. In that film, there's never really a time apart from him getting to where Alderaan's debris is, where it's just the blown up pieces of it. Aside from that, which he couldn't have possibly known, everything he basically does is it doesn't mess up. Everything is very measured. In the cantina, slices the arm off, nothing else. He does all the mind tricks and things. He turns off the tractor beam. He does everything. He wants Vader to be distracted and to kill him. He does that. There's never a time where he's ever panicked. And I think whereas in Clone Wars and in Revenge of the Sith, there's those moments of uncertainty where he's not sure of himself. I think Kenobi's going to find himself in the show as well, and it's going to be interesting to see how he does that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is why this show, I keep repeating this, the show owes it to you guys, the prequel fans, so much more than it does to me, because, Kenobi's role is far more limited in original trilogy than it is in prequels. I would say prequels are The video that I'm dropping tonight, my hot take, is that the Phantom Menace is entirely about Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Kenobi's formative years and becoming the master that he will need to be. So it needs to get it right for you. And to me, it needs to anchor all of fans on an emotional level. I think if the story is there emotionally and certain things kind of like clash a little bit narratively with other stuff, fans will be a lot more forgiving because we're like, no, I don't care. It's so good, I don't care. Mm-hmm. It's like when the Rogue One was coming out, nobody was looking for that story. It's like, dude, we know the plans to the Death Star were stolen. Like, why are you telling me this story? I don't want this. You see the trailer. Oh, no, wait, hold on a second. No, I think, I might want to see that. It's like a complete 180 change around. And when people came out of the theaters, my friends, I had like 10 plus people sitting in the row with me that I bought tickets for. And some of my friends were like, Ben, this is my favorite Star Wars movie.
So my friend said that as well.
Yeah.
Didn't expect it. And you knew the ending. So I have faith. I don't think Ewan McGregor would have signed up to it either. I think, one thing he did say is he was doing this for the prequel fans. He said, obviously, let's be honest here, part of it was money, but to do something like Star Wars, he already had the fame. He didn't need to get any more Star Wars. He didn't have to do this necessarily. He could just said, no, he could have, they could have had another person to play him, which would have made me very sad.
I kind of feel different.
Really?
Yeah, I feel when it's Star Wars, it beckons and calls. Like, you don't say no to Star Wars.
Yeah.
And he's there, and maybe partially, like you said, maybe he felt like he doesn't necessarily have to do it for his career because he's as established as he'll ever get, but maybe he did need to be there because he felt he took it personally. He's like, hey, I was kind of mentored by George as well. I know the inside and out of this character like no one else. I got to be present just to see what this new crowd is doing with my character.
Yeah, and I do believe that he did it. I do believe he did it, not just for the money. I do think he did do it because he wanted to and he was passionate about it. And he did say, the prequels are difficult to make because the technology, George Lucas's vision wasn't quite in line with what we had technologically speaking at the time. He was about 5 years ahead. If the Star Wars movies, if he'd have waited till 2005 to make Phantom Menace, then half of the issues with the CGI wouldn't have been as obvious because the budget would have pushed them over. It would have been like the way people view Avatar or a lot of James Cameron movies. If there was just that, even in the sequel trilogy, there's never really any CGI in the sequel trilogy that people are like, that doesn't really look right, even when they're living beings. Whereas in the prequels, there are elements of that because it wasn't quite there, and no matter how many times you remaster it, you can't quite do it. Same with the original trilogy when you add things in there. But I went off on a tangent about CGI then and George Lucas' vision about it. But anyway, Kenobi, because they did a lot of blue screen stuff, like a lot of Mustafar, all of Mustafar was basically, it wasn't practical
all
sets.
Of episode 3, I think, is blue screen.
Yeah, almost the entire thing. Yeah, so it's like having to visualize that while acting and doing all these things is very difficult. And now he gets to act with the volume, where you've got the practical parts as well as the screen that you can see. So it helps him get into that. But he said, there are fans who've always loved my performance as Kenobi. There are fans who've always loved these films that for the mainstream audience, a lot of people hated. And for years, these fans kept the love of Star Wars going. They're the ones who kept reading the books, the comics and things. And now I'm starting to paraphrase, but he's being like, they're the ones that kept the love going. And because of them, now the sequels could get made. And so he wants to reward that love, If the prequels were as bad as certain fans say they were, that the Star Wars would have died then and it wouldn't be where it is now. It kind of needed, although the prequels definitely could have been better, I'm not denying that, they are an important part of Star Wars history and we wouldn't be where we are now.
Just like prequels are. Without prequels, we would not be here. Without prequels, so much of what makes Star Wars amazing would not be possible. Yeah. And this is why a fan like myself is able to look back on myself the way that I approached these films simply on the merit of, oh, it's good cinema, it's not bad cinema. It's so trivializing the story that is hidden beneath. Like, yes, okay, get off your high horse. Maybe that's cinematically it could have been something different, but there's still value in it. Look at it, go beyond. I'm telling you, Mike, I am, as far as Star Wars books, comics are concerned, I'm a closet prequel fan. I always will be. And I never liked since day one. I I couldn't stand when people talk badly about those movies. Like, okay, all right, not the greatest cinema, but there's still content in there that is so pure and so good. And George Lucas, as a storyteller, he was always will be my old grandpa who made my childhood special. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I grew up with prequels. You know, I had 2 different Obi-Wan's lightsabers. You know, when you could play the Obi-Wan Kenobi game on the Xbox, and whenever you could play the Revenge of the Sith video game, you could play as Obi-Wan and Anakin and things. So any game I could play as Obi-Wan, I would.
Yeah.
He was glorious. And yeah, the prequels, that because they're always part of my childhood, it's just, for me, they're quite fused together, the original trilogy and the prequels. For me, I think in a lot of Star Wars fans' heads, they've got the original trilogy period, then there's a gap. And I'm talking differently to how I was visualizing it in the lore and how chronologically the things. I'm just talking about, like, in your mind, how you experience Star Wars and how you lived through them. Usually, for most people, it's, you know, awaken. It's watch the original Star Wars trilogy either when they come out, or you're aware enough at an age in sort of the 80s and 90s where you then watch them for the first time. You're like, oh my god, these are incredible, as most people think, because they are amazing movies, the original trilogy. I think that's undeniable. And you've got this period of time that everyone kind of went through where you didn't have any other Star Wars. Then you've got the prequel fans who kind of, like me, who grew up with the prequels, and our experience was mirrored and parallel in some ways to yours, in the way that you remember seeing the original trilogies and then nothing else coming after. And I kind of had that. I had the experience of watching the original trilogies and then Phantom Menace and then the other 2 kind of after that. But when Revenge of the Sith ended, I was like, oh, there you go. There's the end of Star Wars. That's it. Gone now. It's gone forever. There'll be a bit of bits and pieces here and there, a few books, comics, maybe games, whatever. But that's basically it. That's Star Wars done. And then we get the Renaissance about 10 years later when The Force Awakens comes out. So for me, I've kind of got I've got my early life, which is prequels and originals. Then there's the gap. Then there's the sequels. Whereas you've got, you know, 2 gaps in it, in a sense. And yeah, I mean, Kenobi is just going to really connect those things together in a way that we haven't had enough. Solo didn't really, nor did Rogue One. Rogue One was a prequel to A New Hope, and Solo was a prequel to the whole original trilogy. Yeah, we haven't had the middle ground. You know, we've got Bad Batch, which is like a taste, but that's right at the start of it. You know, we've got Rebels, which is right at the end of it, but we haven't. It's like things have been kind of closing in from the outside, and it's like, what was in the middle? And it's like, we're now finally here. It's like, oh, it's Kenobi. Kenobi is the gooey center of the 2.
That's the appeal, I think, of the expanded universe and the Legends and Canon's books. But let's face it, for a vast majority of fans, books are books. But the first media that you want in Star Wars is feature films or TV shows. And here comes Kenobi. And once again, I don't ask or require it to be my version of my beloved Star Wars and parallel everything that I saw in A New Hope. I don't need it to be that. I need it to be an all-inclusive. But it needs to set the stage that where both original and prequel trilogies work well and work strong, and the spotlight is not taken from central themes and scenes in A New Hope. We're talking about the Vader on Kenobi stuff. Like, how do you do that? I think it's a lot easier to pull on prequel stuff because we know a great deal about Kenobi from prequels, and just continue that and continue ignoring a lot of lore that George Lucas himself has retconned. He went back and he retconned his original trilogy. And I'm not saying it as his criticism. I'm saying it as the creator who said, you know what? I don't think I'm done with Star Wars yet. Let me tell another story. Because, you know, it's constantly, when you look at his interviews, at one point he said he had outlined for 4 trilogies, then it was only 2 trilogies or 1 trilogy, and then at one point he says that the Skywalker saga ends with episode 6, then he does treatments for the sequels. He's all over the place creatively. He's excited about it. And I think when he was making prequels, he said, you know what, let me try again. And nobody knows the story better than the storyteller himself. And I'm pretty sure he was like, you know what? Yeah, let me just do a little something here with C-3PO and R2-D2 that, you know, we see him in Anakin's home. It's like, whatever. It's just, that's what I want to do. That's part of all storytelling. And I have blasphemed on Twitter recently. I made a post that I said that I don't hold on to strict timeline as far as the stories and events go. I'm pretty loose about it. And if some events like Kanan Jarrus in the beginning of the Bad Batch don't coincide, I'm fine with that. And one guy who is called expandeduniverse.com comments me on my tweet. He says, "Look at these kids, how cynical and ironic. His Twitter account says Star Wars timeline, yet he doesn't care about Star Wars timeline." He goes like on the this tangent of that. I don't understand anything. But I'm like, no. The point is, it's like it's a sandbox, and the creator himself, George Lucas, gets to play with it because it's his creation. That's all it is. So what? Some things misalign with the original trilogy. Like that has always happened in Legends, and I don't understand the purists why they're so anal about it.
Yeah, I agree. I'd rather have good storytelling and fun things going on than have perfect aligned timelines. Like, the Bad Batch is a good example because although the start of the Bad Batch, there are elements with when Caleb Dume appears in it, obviously Kanan Jarrus. When that happens, it's a bit annoying because like, oh, well, the comics is not the same as that. But for me, I was like, apart from the lightsaber color change and then also a few bits and pieces, in my head canon, it's quite easy just to be like, no, the events still happen the same as in Kanan. Yeah. It was just what happened in the Bad Batch, and then when Kanan disappears or Caleb disappears in the Bad Batch, then that part that aligns, there's a point in the comics that you just go, oh, click, there you go, and then the same.
It's easy to put together.
Yeah, I don't need specific dates. Even when I do Star Wars comics in canon and I talk about general dates and things, it's always like I always say, Star Wars don't want to tell you, the third month in 32 BBY. That's not what they want to do because it just, as soon as you start splitting hairs with timelines, it becomes so messy. If you look at it realistically and you read thinking about just canon, if you read all the Star Wars main run comics, which there's 75 of them, and they're set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and that's over 3 years. If you read all of those, and you also read, I think it's Weapon of a Jedi by Greg Pak, which I believe takes place in between those two time periods as well, and you read the Age of Republic comics, which has a few, Age of Rebellion comics, there's a few in there as well. The Princess Leia miniseries is set in between that time as well. The Han Solo miniseries set inside that time as well. And I haven't read every single piece of canon content, but when you look into it, of how much time Leia, Han, Chewie, and Luke spend doing other things in between those 3 years, you can't really and then especially when you do between Empire and Return of the Jedi, you get the stories like the Crimson Reign stuff and the War of the Bounty Hunters things, which are all really interesting and I'm really enjoying them. But if you think about it too much, and you think about all the stories that have happened between those two time periods, it's getting, if it's not already surpassed how much realistic time you could say is passed in between those two things, especially when you get in the comics, you sometimes goes like days or weeks later. You're like, well, if each of these comics is one day, you've just skipped more. You look at it and you go, yeah, this amount of time is being overswelled. But I don't want them to go in in 2 years' time, they go, well, we've done it. We've filled up all the time between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, so we're never going to have another story ever again with Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewie, because it's impossible. We've timelined it all out perfectly to the hour, apart from a few toilet breaks and maybe a couple of card games, or maybe a singular comic strip about repairing the Falcon that takes half an hour in canon. We can't have any more stories of those characters in that time.
You can't be so strict with it, especially in a 50-year-old franchise. Things are bound to run on one another. It's fine.
Yeah, 100%. It's just part of it. So I want to ask you, we'll start to kind of wrap up-ish around this point. I do apologize to people hearing me trying to suppress coughing. It's pretty unpleasant. I want to ask, I know you don't often like saying about predictions and things, but I'm still going to ask you these questions anyway.
Go for it.
Do you want, I think I know your answer, so I'm kind of leading you on a little bit. Do you want any other characters to appear in the show? As in, for example, there's a lot of rumblings and rumours that Ahsoka's going to pop up in maybe flashbacks or things like that. There's, there's also concerns that it's going to connect with the Andor series. Is it every series is going to have a breadcrumb for the last one? I know you'll be happy if the story's good and that's the top priority, but excluding that element, would you want it to expand and connect to more stuff, or do you want it to be more of a isolated story between just Kenobi and Vader and maybe Owen and Beru sort of thing? What do you, if you could choose the parameters of how many characters become central to the plot, where do you kind of want it to be?
We have waited for so long to see this moment in the life of Kenobi versus Vader that I think you will dilute that story with each new cameo that you introduce.
I agree.
There's a difference between the cameo and supporting role. You can have Ahsoka in the show not being a cameo. A character showing up in the show does not make them a cameo. Mm-hmm. That is what is Marvel and Disney have adapted that business model. It was like, well, we have these characters here and those parallel shows running. Tune in, sign up for a subscription. We get it. We get the business aspect of it. It's fine. Cinema has always walked hand in hand with the business, right? You gotta make revenue on the story you're telling so you could keep delighting and satisfying the fans, but also the creators get to practice what they enjoy doing, telling stories. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's a point in time where it starts feeling very artificial and played out and contrived, versus if you write in a character that is introduced from the beginning, not just rickrolled into the show or like, surprise, this character shows up, Luke Skywalker at the end of season 2 and Grogu, he picks him up, which to me is just total bullshit. Like, I don't like that. I don't like when they treat characters like this. I like when there's a precedent for it. I like when it's developed enough, when it's sensible. To me, yes, I would like to see one character, which I feel does not get enough play and makes all the reasons in the world to be in there.
Can I guess?
Yes.
Is it going to be Quinlan Vos?
No.
Oh, because that's who I'd love to show up in this show.
No, he would be cool. Cal Kestis.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because this would be set, I think, just after Jedi Fallen Order. And the actor...
Well, 10 years after the Order 66, right? I mean, during Order 66... Cal Kestis is what, like 9-10 years old?
It's 5. Yeah, so I think it's 5 years. I think Jedi Fallen Order is 5 or 6 years after Order 66, and I think that Kenobi is about 10 years after. So it would be about 4 or 5 years in theory. Kenobi's 4 or 5 years after Jedi.
After the Fallen Order, right? Yeah, so he's a young man there, right? Yeah, he's a young man there. And spoiler alert, guys! For those of you who didn't play the game, definitely go play it. They built such a fantastic character who is integral to this Order 66 thing. And by the end of it, once again, spoiler alert, right? He decides to go and be what Luke becomes later on. He says, I need to restore the Jedi Order. I'm looking for that new hope, not maybe in the same way that he needs Luke Skywalker. Obviously, he's still a kid. But how would the two characters collaborate together and say, we need to restore the Jedi Order?
I would love to. I would love to see that. I know there was a photo recently of the actor who plays Cal Kestis, who, he did the motion capture and the voice acting and things, and he looks identical to the character of Cal Kestis, and he's a good actor. He's in Gotham as well, and he's in a few other things. I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but
I'll look it up right now.
Wonderful. And I've got a guest on my show who's being my lackey, who's looking up things for me. And I have my phone right there. I could do it, but I'm not going to. I would like to see him in there because the actor, he was photographed at Galaxy's Edge semi-recently, and they've got a Cal Kestis lightsaber now that you can buy, like a replica, the way he got it from Jarrah Tapal at the start.
Cameron Monaghan.
There we go, perfect.
Or Monaghan, I'm sorry.
That's no problem. I assume it's not to him. We'll ask him. We'll get him to watch this. But I would like to see him. I think there's a chance, because normally when Star Wars post pictures of like certain actors being in places randomly, it's like sometimes it's like, yeah, that's cool, but sometimes it's like, oh, what are they doing there?
Yeah.
But I don't think they will, although I'd like to, because I think they're saving him for Jedi Fallen Order 2. He might make an appearance in one episode, and maybe it'll be like a soft trailer for Jedi Fallen Order 2. Maybe it'll be a case of he pops up and then the next day the trailer drops for Jedi Fallen Order 2.
See, that's what I don't like. I don't like this very administrative use of characters. Like, he needs to be here because we're planning over there, and this is going to be the next stage, and we're creating this whole narrative and the story, so he needs to show up, make sure. Like, I don't buy Dave Filoni's and Jon Favreau's explanation why Mandalorian shows up in the Book of Boba Fett show and completely steals the show and completely disbalances the character. I just don't get it. Guys, you're professionals. You're on top of your game. You know what you're doing. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Maybe there's somebody who was behind it who didn't have enough confidence in the show and say, oh, you know what, let's just put Mandalorian in there because he's a bulletproof fan favorite and we know the fans will respond to him accordingly. I don't want any of this to distract from Kenobi and Vader. Inquisitors, yes, it makes total sense for the Inquisitors to be there. They are widely shown throughout the trailers. They're obviously not cameos. They're obviously going to take a central stage of the story. It makes sense. Whoever else you're going to introduce, as long as they're not cameoed, but part of the story, I'm in there. Even Quinlan Vos.
I think that the Inquisitors are only going to be... I wouldn't be surprised if they're only in it for like 1 to 3 episodes, and then at the third episode it changes to Vader pursuing Kenobi, and then the 5th episode is kind of him trying to find him and getting to him and drawing him out, and then the 6th episode is just a big battle. But I will say I wouldn't mind Cal Kestis showing up, but I would enjoy it because I'm a sucker, you know. No spoilers at all, I will clarify this, but actually no, I'm not even going to say it, because if me saying it is actually somewhat a spoiler, so ignore I even just said anything. But I think that with Kenobi, I would love to see Quinlan Vos, because he hasn't had an on-screen appearance apart from being a background extra in The Phantom Menace, which George Lucas was like, that background extra looks really cool. I'm going to make a character from that. And that's where Quinlan Vos actually came from. And, you know, Quinlan Vos was in the Clone Wars, he was in the one Clone Wars arc, and then he was meant to be in another arc, which was the Asajj Ventress Dark Disciple arc, but obviously didn't get made, so they turned it into the book Dark Disciple. And if you listen to the audiobook, it's kind of like halfway to a Clone Wars episode. Obviously, it's just not the visual element, and it's great. But Quinlan Vos, obviously in Legends, he has a lot more. That's where the character really breathes. And I've not actually read any of his Legends content, and it's on my list because I really want to. But I just think his character would work so well in Kenobi because they clashed a bit in the Clone Wars. He's unknown enough to be... He could be kind of a fresh slate in a sense. As long as he has the reminiscence part of the Clone Wars, which is he was kind of a maverick and he was great at being undercover. That's it. It's been 10 years since we last saw him. You could change quite a lot of his character if they wanted to fit in the story. I'm not saying they should, because I like Quinlan Vos, but they've got the freedom to do that. Whereas if they choose Cal Kestis, it's quite a narrow lane. He has to be kind of one way that's consistent with previously, 5 years ago, and how his kind of coming of age happened. So I think that Quinlan Vos could work really well because him and Kenobi acted in the Jedi Order very differently, and Quinlan Vos' speciality is going undercover and not being seen. And I think in episode like 2 or 3, Kenobi's getting pursued by like Inquisitors a huge amount. And what would be really cool is if someone kind of captured him and he was like, and this person speaks and he was like, wait a minute, I recognize that voice, turns around and it's Quinlan Vos, and he's like, you need to learn to be incognito. You, Kenobi, are terrible at being undercover. What happened? He could even make a comment like, I remember in Clone Wars you went undercover that one time. Have you forgotten all of that incognito stuff? And obviously that's referring to, when he had the surgery and things and became a bounty hunter. And it's like, they would have so much to go there with only like 4 lines of dialogue, and they could create such a cool dynamic and bring Quinlan Vos to the screen. They could spin off. They could have. I know you say you don't want other stuff, but like I'd love to have another Quinlan Vos book or a series, like a comic series, or even a live action series about him, and just him surviving as a Jedi undercover and having the freedom to do with him whatever you wanted, like not being constrained to the plot of Kenobi, which we know.
So he's a big trick here. Here's the thing from. Again, my understanding, and guys, please feel free to correct me where I stand. I didn't just go in and completely research every detail before we started this podcast. But the way I understand it is it's thanks to the Legends comic book artist that he became prominent. They saw him as a prop sitting in the background in George Lucas's film. They made him a creation. And then when George Lucas saw that and saw his popularity, he put him right back in the Clone Wars show, which a lot of fans were not happy with because they changed a lot of things around. For example, there is no mention of his Kefar culture that he's part of. And there is no mention of his psychometry, where he touches upon any object like a lightsaber or anything, and through it, he kind of resonates with an inanimate object and gets the sense of feel. What's that?
In Clone Wars.
Does it?
I keep forgetting. It's the central point to his involvement.
Oh, so psychometry is mentioned.
Yeah. Him and Kenobi team up because of his psychometry.
So I am forgetting it. Thank you for reminding me. But was it mentioned that he's a Kefar?
No, it wasn't.
No, okay. So I think this is a little bit tricky where if they reintroduce him, which actually that helps a great deal. Thanks for clarifying things to me, right? Because Clone Wars is canon, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is what I would want to see reinforced. If you're going to bring him in, once again, make a sense of why him and his character type, his personality, his willingness to do whatever the heck it takes to do the right thing. How could that work in between Kenobi and Vader? Like, where does he stand?
Yeah, exactly. And in the book Dark Disciple, his psychometry comes out in that as well. It's used.
See, I forgot. It's been years. I read it right when it just came out, and I remember just completely being in love with it. And I remember actually arguing with fans like, "Oh no, this is not my Quinlan Voss." I'm like, "No, dude, it's actually a lot like in the old comics books. You know, it's really good, but just do it right."
Yeah, and I think one of the ways he could do it even is if he just, in episode 3, or episode 2 or 3 of the Kenobi show, you could maybe see Kenobi running away, and the last scene that you see is a hooded figure picking up a cloak, and then it ends. And then the next episode, you see that something happen. You see the last few things that just happened with Kenobi, but through like a force vision, and it zooms out.
Yeah.
And all you see is the hood, and then a yellow line. And you can't, your eyes, you can't see that. A yellow line, you can't see anything else. And then it
Mike,
cuts.
you're hyping me up, man.
If that was the case, I just think Quinlan Voss would work so well. He could easily find Kenobi. He was familiar with him. It's unknown enough character. If any actors got pulled into playing Kenobi, playing Quinlan Voss, because there's no face to link to him, because he's only been in animation and drawn, they could have the freedom to have almost any actor. And I think they could do. I mean, I think it may be a weird choice. I think if they did him right, I think Jason Momoa could. I don't think he would, because if Jason Momoa is going to be in Star Wars, everyone would know about it. But I think he would make a really good Quinlan Voss. He's got that kind of jokey broness to him, but also the darkness, which is what Quinlan Voss really has behind his jokey facade. He's got this deep darkness to him. And I don't think he's going to be in Kenobi either, to be honest. I think it's less likely than Cal Kestis, probably. Or maybe he would work better, but I think he's less likely to appear. But if Quinlan Voss was ever going to appear in live action, this would be the time. I mean, we're changing this from the Kenobi podcast to the Quinlan Voss podcast. That's what
I wanted to actually mention one more character. Can I?
Yeah,
you did remind me of something. You started talking about all these cameos that I just couldn't help it. So there is one character from the Legends books, that specifically comics, that I would love if he appears, because he would make all the sense in the world to be here on Tatooine at this specific time. He's probably, I would say, one of the best developed villains in Star Wars, and his name is Asharad Head, the son of Sharad Head. And he was this Jedi who, during Clone Wars, became one with the Tusken tribes. He interacts with Anakin. He interacts with Kenobi on Tatooine. At one point, he becomes a warlord. He abandons the Jedi ways. He leads the Tuskens to their destiny, like, you know, taking their place of Tatooine, that the tribes could live in peace and away from all the settlers and stuff like this. And later on, don't ask me how, but centuries after, he survives, and he's resurrected during the times of Luke Skywalker's descendant, and he becomes the next Sith Lord, the Darth Krayt.
Yeah. So
that little story, which to me was one of the best written stories in Star Wars, in regards to prequels, in regards to Anakin, in regards to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the lore of Tatooine. This is the time. If you are showing me Kenobi reconciling with the events of the Order 66, he is your guy. He's the guy to go to and say, oh, by the way, remember our last encounter? Remember that we had to settle our differences, this and that. Remember how you instructed, because he was the guy who also helped Anakin reconcile with his parents, his mother's being taken away from his mom. He was the one who said, like, look, it is okay. Like, I also experienced something similar like that. Anyway, he's just a tremendous character.
Yeah, I know of Darth Krayt, and I know what he looks like with the skull of was it Von Tool crab or something like that?
Yeah.
Because there's a character in the High Republic Adventures who is an Aloxian called Quart, and he wears a helmet the same. He wears from a Von Tool crab or whatever they're called. And I think that's a direct reference, because I think Daniel Jose Older created Quart, and so he's referencing Darth Krayt. But I that would be an interesting character. I would like to see that in a show, but I don't think it would come into Kenobi, because I think that would, if the Inquisitors weren't in the trailer, I'd be inclined to say that's a possibility. But I have a suspicion that the Inquisitors and I think the Inquisitors are going to be the main bad until Vader comes in, and I don't know if they're going to add other elements. If they did have that breadcrumbs where he did go just one scene where he goes and talks to this person, and he's like, you don't even know who he is. The character doesn't get told. You don't get his name. It's just a full conversation, whatever. And then right at the end, he goes, I'll see you around. And then he says whatever his name is, and the person says, no, you won't. And then some story could come out. Maybe in Tales of the Jedi, there's like an animated short, and it could be Luke interacting with Darth Krayt. Who knows? It could be an anthology series of Tales of the Jedi. It could be loads of cool legend stuff done in animation. Who knows? We're going off tangent about Kenobi. So we'll wrap up, but I will ask one final question. Obviously, if you have any further questions, please send them my way. But the lightsaber. Now, I love Obi-Wan's lightsaber. I think it's great. But obviously, he's probably going to use it quite sparingly. At this point in the galaxy, he doesn't want to just be brandishing it around like he does in A New Hope, really. So, how much do you think we're going to see of his lightsaber? Is it going to be held on to and you don't see it till the very end? You can see it right at the start, and that's what causes the events of these things. What do you think? How much lightsaber screen time do you think we're getting from Kenobi himself?
Well, if you think of the lightsaber within the context of this story, it's basically the flashlight. The moment you want to crank up that tension and put the story in a full gear and step on the gas pedal, just have him activate his lightsaber. So I think structurally, what you want to do is, again, 6 episodes is very little real estate to tell your story. You got to be very, very economical, and you got to get to the point pretty fast. I would assume that by the 2nd episode, or at least by the beginning of the 3rd episode, he needs to start using it, because you need to start dialing it up and throwing all the forces against Kenobi, all the odds against him that he has to overcome in order to fulfill his arc in the story, right? Because there's going to be growth. He's going to be in one place in the beginning of the show, probably haggard and tired and disillusioned, to a point where he's like, no, there is a new hope, and I will fight for this kid's future, right? So you built up there, maybe beginning of the 3rd episode, he takes it out. He uses it, like you said, sparingly. But once again, how he's going to come to face Vader, that remains to be seen. I can't even speculate there. How about yourself?
Yeah, I don't think he'll use it until he has to. Probably, I think it'll be hidden, and you'll see it a little bit on his belt, or there'll be one little nod to it. I think, the likelihood is from the trailer and stuff, he's going to leave Tatooine, and I think they released 2 episodes at once. A, because of scheduling and stuff, but also B, because I think they probably had audience reactions and go, not enough. In episode 1, it's all about Kenobi, but it doesn't actually give you any information on what the plot's going to be. It just kind of lays groundwork, and I think the 2nd episode is where everything's going to kick off. I think that's going to be the episode where he leaves Tatooine, or that maybe he gets his lightsaber out and then has to really defend himself against Inquisitors. I have a vision of him, someone getting the jump on him, and an Inquisitor launching, and the only thing he can do is ignite his lightsaber and hold it up, sort of thing. And that's the first time maybe you see it, is him solely using it in defense. So I have that kind of idea, and I think that the 2nd episode really is going to be probably where the lightsaber first comes out. If it doesn't come out right at the very start, which I don't think it will, I think it will come out then, and that'll be when, the tension rises, you say, and then from the end of episode 2, we'll be at the edge of our seat like, what's happening next? And I think that's going to be it for all of them. But I hope, I don't want them to overdo it, because he's meant to be kind of in hiding. He's meant to be, there has to be a pretty good reason for him to ignite his lightsaber, even on any planet, because anywhere has got the warnings of the Jedi. Yeah,
like I said, it's a flashlight in darkness. The moment you ignite it, it's like, oh, okay, let's report him. I do have one last question for you as well. Seeing the body of work that Disney era has produced, and all the stuff that we have on Disney Channel, putting aside our wants and wishes for the Star Wars, pragmatically, what do you expect out of the show?
I expect a deep dive into Kenobi's state of mind and his relationship with Owen, and why he didn't train Luke. Then his struggles with between balancing essentially being a good person and boredom and duty. And then I think he's also going to have to make some hard decisions and then go on this little goose chase across the galaxy and then have a cathartic final confrontation with Vader before his last confrontation where he actually dies, where it's going to be his last try at bringing Anakin back from the dark side. He's going to fail, obviously. And then there's going to be a lightsaber
and the quality of it?
I am hopeful. You know, although...
What do you expect, like, realistic, as an adult, as, like, having the experience of having Disney Plus for 4+ years?
Well, the thing is that if I compare Bad Batch and I compare it to the Marvel stuff that's been coming out, I know because of Disney Plus, I would be more hopeful than the Star Wars stuff in essence. Like, I really like Mandalorian Series 2. I said that before. I like Book of Boba Fett. I like Mandalorian Series 1. I loved Mandalorian Series 2. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I love the Luke bit at the end. I know we've discussed it many times, but you said earlier on that you don't like it. I like it. I think it fits. I think it works really well. I think his appearance in Book of Boba Fett is unnecessary, but because they brought Grogu into it and stuff, they just shoehorned him in, just like Ahsoka's appearance was kind of pointless there. But
yeah,
It's hard because, you know, Book of Boba Fett I wasn't that fussed on. I was just like, yeah, I'll watch it because it looks kind of cool. Mandalorian was a new character, so it's a chance to do something new, and Series 2 is a continuation of that. Kenobi, I think, has so much of a stake in it. I think that Disney have really, aside from the trilogies, the sequel trilogy, I think this is the one project that Disney have probably put the most amount of effort and thought into. And because it was originally thought to be a film back before Solo was announced, so it's been in production for a long time. And I think that Book of Boba Fett was an afterthought. I think they were like, hey, let's do a couple episodes of Boba Fett. Oh, we've got enough material for like 5. And then Disney execs went, let's make it 7. And they were like, we can't do that. Well, we filmed a bit of Mandalorian stuff. Let's just put that in there as well. Just while and then we can delay Mandalorian Series 3 a little bit or something, whatever. Or we've changed direction what we were going to do with Mando Series 3. We were going to do it something about him dealing with that Grogu, but we want you to change that. Grogu has to be in it. So now you have to do a pivot halfway through. You know, there's all kinds of different elements into that, which could be the reason why Mando and Boba Fett kind of came out. But Boba Fett feels like an afterthought. But I think that Kenobi is the big thing. It's, in a lot of ways, they already lost fans to the sequel trilogy. By Last Jedi, it kind of felt like Rise of Skywalker was kind of made just to stop the trilogy, less so than to really add anything or to really be a big grandiose finish. It was kind of, in my opinion, it was like, okay, we're done with this now. Blop. There you go. Done. Finished. Sequel trilogy done. And you're like, okay, that was quite unsatisfying and predictable, but fair. Yeah. But Kenobi is different. I think since that time, they're like, this is, if we don't do this right, all of the people who've been hating on Disney and saying Disney era Star Wars is bad, and that apart from Rogue One, they've not released anything good. And maybe some people say Bad Batch, but, you know, Bad Batch is still...
They'll put it to a tiki torch. I'm telling you right now, prequel fans will ignite fires. They will march to Lucasfilm Ranch or whatever it is, ILM, and they will burn the building down.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, you know, for me, as a realistically, you know, living through the prequels, living through Clone Wars, Rebels, and you know, this understanding that sometimes wishing for the best out of life and out of the best stuff that you'll follow, sometimes things don't just work out the way they are, and how things are also settling in terms of how Star Wars are being delivered to us via Disney Plus. Basically was saying that for somebody who has experienced all different permutations of Star Wars and different levels of quality and different artists coming in and bringing their own unique voice to it, the way that it has been aligning itself on the Disney Plus, I honestly expect something that is a bit on the underwhelming side, a bit familiar, a bit expected, and some parts safe, with a couple of cameos sprinkled for a good measure. I'm basically bracing myself for something that's unremarkable. It's like, oh yeah, cool, yeah, that's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Oh yeah, it's that guy, you know, Ewan McGregor. He's reprising the role, right? Yeah, oh cool, yeah, nice. And then we kind of fade into obscurity again, waiting for that special juice, that special moment where we're like, oh, we all gasp when Logan or Joker, these sort of movies, or the new Batman come out, and we're like, oh my God, I've been waiting for this. I'm not sure whether it's going to hit that high mark.
I'm hoping Kenobi is that. That's what my hope is. I think they've had enough series, both animated and live action, and they've had enough movies and things to really... For me, it's not their final chance, because I'm going to love Star Wars regardless, and I'm going to watch anything they pump out, but this is a pivotal moment. This is something where if they don't deliver on this, they're going to lose a very large chunk of their fan base, and people are going to start experiencing Star Wars fatigue a lot quicker. Because if Andor is not going to pull the same amount of people that Kenobi is. Even me, I'm like, yeah, I'll watch Andor. It's basically going to be a grittier version of Rebels, but with certain people in Rogue One. That's cool, but part of the fun of Rebels is a completely new cast, and you don't know what happens to them, and stuff happens. And in Andor, it's like, yeah, you're going to get a new cast, aside from Andor and probably him meeting K2SO, but there's going to be certain people that pop up, and you're like, well, I know they are going to survive, and Andor, the main character, is going to survive. And it's like, well, this is starting to feel a little bit like Solo, where it's like having the majority of characters already established, you know what's going to happen. I know Kenobi is, in essence, that in certain ways, but Kenobi is about a man's journey. It's about, look, the obvious broad strokes of the storytelling is the characters survive. How can we write a riveting and good enough plot to keep it interesting? It's kind of like The Batman in certain ways. In The Batman, the general assumption was Batman's probably not going to die in the first film of his reboot. It's probably just not going to happen. It could, and it would have been a very ballsy move to do, but it probably wasn't going to happen. So when you watch that movie, the thought is Batman going to die? It's, what's this interpretation of Batman going to bring? What are these characters going to bring? And what are the surrounding characters around him?
Excellent point, yeah.
Could they die or not? But not even just about death, but how's it going to affect Batman? One of the reasons the Batman works so well is because we got a different iteration of Batman that was still connects with the core content and material and lines up with the previous iterations of Batman we've had, but still brings something new, and it's more gritty and dark and adult and mature, and it hasn't got that comic book silliness to it that certain ones have got. That's what we want with Kenobi. We want him to have the emotional beats of the prequels, but none of the goofy, campy stuff. We want it to have the special effects and the visual kind of weight behind it that the prequels tried to have but maybe fell a bit short on, but that the sequels delivered on. But obviously the sequels delivering on those visual things made that some of the story elements didn't reach as high. Take all the best elements from what we've been doing over the last 10 years, or even the last 20, and use everything you've learned to use it to bring us the most concise, deep and emotional version of a character. This is going to be the most amount of Kenobi that we will have ever seen. This is all excluding the Clone Wars, because the Clone Wars, although it definitely is showing Kenobi, because it's not live action, if we just take that out of this discussion, when you think about live action, his screen time in Kenobi is probably going to exceed that of everything in the prequels and the original put together. So we're basically getting the amount of Kenobi, in theory, that we've had up to this point, excluding Clone Wars. Yeah. And so with that, they've got to do it well, because all the other shows that are coming out, I'm excited about Ahsoka, but Kenobi and Ahsoka are the two big ones. And if they mess this up and then they mess up Ahsoka, it's going to be like, my fatigue is probably going to come in a lot quicker. Like
See ya.
When I eventually have kids one day, it's not going to be the rush they need to watch all of Star Wars because it's the best thing ever.
Right.
You need to watch these, probably 11 films because they make a really cool story and most of them are amazing. And then you don't have to worry about the series. I feel I don't want that to happen. That's my concern, but I don't think it will. I have faith. I am the optimistic prequel lover. But yeah,
I'm the optimistic prequel and sequel lover.
But not the original trilogy, though.
No, well, that's the original trilogy. That's God tier.
That's true. Yeah, you don't even need to say you like the original trilogy.
Yeah, that's the altar.
What are you doing? Cool. Well, Ben, I think this has been there's a great time to sort of wrap up. So please tell people any final statements and things that you want to say that we may not have already mentioned, and then plug your stuff. Obviously, I'll put a link in the description to it when it airs on my show. But the floor is yours, good sir.
Thank you, Mike, once again for having me. It's a full delight to talk to you. The way that you put these things in my mind make me think about the Book of Boba Fett, how things came about, why this was done this way. You almost feel to me like you have some secret connect to the Hollywood industry and an insider, and they just feed you information. You're like, oh, so this is how this really is. All right, I get it now. Thank you, Mike. All right, let me jog it down my notes. Thank you. My final thoughts are, guys, I think the best way to go into this is with an open mind. I know there's a lot that rides on it. I know we all want it to be good, but be open and receptive to new ideas. Sometimes it takes a while. When I listen to my favorite heavy metal album, it didn't become my favorite overnight. Sometimes it takes a while to chew on and try to digest and just try to understand what the filmmaker was trying to show you. And sometimes it doesn't have to be everything from the past and archaic and do exactly by the book what George Lucas was trying to do. Guys, just have a good time, keep an open mind, and keep your reservations moderate so you don't go in and automatically get disappointed. As far as myself goes, Star Wars Timeline, this is where Mike and I do our podcast. I also have a Star Wars Timeline Facebook group where you all can come in and express yourselves, guys, and tell us what you like, what you just like. We'll try to focus on mature conversations where everybody gets to say their piece. So that's pretty much on Twitter. I just basically goof around and throw random content. And I've been recently accused of posting too much Tomb Raider stuff because I love Tomb Raider. That's why. Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
No problem at all, and I will second that. If you want a way to talk about Star Wars with me and Ben, go to Star Wars Timeline, because I get notifications when people post in there. I can't respond to everything because I'd be on the Facebook page all day with a group all day, but it is delightful, and there's a lot of cool conversations I've had with both yourself, Ben, and other people in that group, and there's thousands of us in there, so it's really fun. And yeah, check out Star Wars Timeline. I always mention it in my outros and things, and put links in the description, basically because I come on your show so frequently. In all the show notes of episodes of Genuine Chit-Chat, I think almost since we started talking, which I think was about 6 to 8 months ago, there's always been a link to one of your episodes, because normally I keep them in there for like when I guest spot on someone else's show, I'll keep it in my show notes for, a month or a couple of months, depending how many guest spots I do, depends on, if they kind of cycle through. But yours, it's been like, oh, here's one I did with Ben about the 3 trilogies, and then a few weeks or a couple of months later, oh, here's a prequel, oh, and then his discussion on originals, and then sequels, oh, and then accents in Star Wars, oh, then second part of accents in Star Wars, oh, and then also villains in Star Wars. So it's just like all of that.
Mike, I'm not even jealous at all that you got to interview Kevin Scott. Guys, this is the kind of caliber that guests that Genuine Chit-Chat has. Please, when I drop that link, go check it out. That interview was badass. It was so awesome. I gave like open mouth, just listens to them. It's like, oh, okay, so this is how you conduct an interview on YouTube.
Well, thank you very much. And people listening, you can also check out my conversation with Paolo Villanelli, and also Ben. You spoke with Paolo as well after speaking. After I spoke to him, so they're 2 brilliant conversations to listen to, both of our respective discussions with the great comic book artist. And I also spoke with Claudia Gray in the tail end of 2020 as well. She was delightful to speak with, and I've got plenty more of people I want to speak to regarding Star Wars.
Mention me.
I would if I could, good sir.
I know. I know.
Yes, unfortunately, Disney are quite specific about it. You can't just give out all the Disney contact emails.
I know.
I wish I could. Just give it to everyone. Everyone have Kevin Scott on the show.
You will pass the word from Ben Kenobi.
But yeah, please check out my, all of the stuff I get up to. If you are listening on a podcast app or anything like that, then you can subscribe to my show, Genuine Chit-Chat, and the feed of Comics in Motion, where my Star Wars Comics in Canon episodes air every Saturday, where I go through all Star Wars comics. You've never have to have read a single comic, Star Wars otherwise, in your entire life to enjoy my show. I specifically go through each of the comics, and I go through the plot points of them in bullet point form, so you get a good understanding of what happens in the plot in the canon. And I talk about the many connections. I talk about characters that reappear, and species and planets and other things that pop up that you may think, oh, I recognise that from something. Well, I will tell you what you recognise it from and give trivia and fun facts along the way. And I've done almost every single canon Marvel Star Wars comic to date. And I've also done book reviews on there and other bits and pieces of content as well. And you can also check out my Patreon, because on patreon.com/genuine chit-chat, for as little as £1 a month, you can support the show. You get access to hours of additional content. And I've started doing a lot more Star Wars book reviews over there. I've done a few canon ones like Last Shot, Dark Disciple, and A New Dawn, which is by John Jackson Miller, who obviously wrote the Kenobi book. And then I've also done some Legends stuff because of Ben. I've been inspired and I've been listening to more Legends content. So I've been listening to a lot of it on audiobook and things on Audible. So I've been listening. I started off with Shatterpoint, and then I did Darth Plagueis, and then I just finished Darth Bane, book 1, which, Plagueis was incredible. But
I'm so happy you started it. We got to make an entire podcast about it. Trust me.
We do. When I finish book 3, but I've actually downloaded, because it came out like this week, Brotherhood by Mike Chen, the Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker book, set like the very, very start of the Clone Wars, how Anakin got on his knighthood, and also when they say in episode 3 about how many times Anakin saved Kenobi, and he's like, oh, I saved it this many times, and Kenobi's like, no, not that many times. That business on Caton Nemoidia, that didn't count. The business on Caton Nemoidia happens in this book, so I'm very excited to listen to that audio book of that, so I'll no doubt be putting a review of that up on my Patreon as well. But Ben, good sir, named after
pleasure,
Ben
Mike.
Kenobi, even though you were born before then, but still, whenever I say your name, I think of Ben Kenobi. And I even have in my calendar, like today, it says Ben Kenobi, because Ben Kenobi
well,
chat.
I think it's the biggest compliment.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you're amazing. So speaking with you is always delightful. Thank you as always for having me on your show. It's always delightful having you on my show. And also, yeah, I mentioned it I think earlier, but I will be doing on the feed of Comics in Motion, and I will be dropping videos on my YouTube channel, a weekly discussion show on Kenobi, episode by episode. Obviously, I think me and Megan are going to have to do one, just the two of us, because episode 1 and 2 both drop on Friday. So I'm going to have to get home from work, watch both of those, and do a podcast very quickly. And then in subsequent weeks, I'll have different guests on. And obviously, Ben, you always release episodes of your solo thoughts as well of shows that are coming out too. So there's a variety of different ways to get even more Kenobi content. But yeah, please check those links in the description of either if you're on Ben's channel or if you're on my channel. People who are not familiar with my channel will probably be like, this guy is talking a lot at the end. And it's like, yes. Because on my channel, I normally save it for the outro when I'm not talking to a guest. It's normally my recorded intro, guest chat, and then at the end of the outro. But thought I'd cram it all in here because, Ben, I control the recording this time, so I don't feel bad. I can just keep waffling forever. I can talk for the next hour about myself, but I'm not going to, my friends. But just thank you, Ben, as always, for being delightful.
It's a pleasure, man.
Always
I hope we get to have those chats on Kenobi, on all the Legends books. I'm just going to have to make up a couple of topics and we get right into it.
100%. And High Republic at some point as well.
High Republic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ben.
Guys, take care. Thanks for listening to us.